Worldwide, we're looking at approximately 350 million people with diabetes. There's no question that we're in the midst of a diabetes epidemic. Right now, 1 in 3 Medicare dollars is spent in the care of people with diabetes. 1 in 10 total healthcare dollars is spent on people with diabetes. There's no question that this is a major problem.
What in particular is the correlation with the diet and diabetes?
I'm not going to get into that.
Into diet?
No.
Harvard researchers looked at 9 prospective studies finding that just 1 serving of processed meat per day increased risk of developing diabetes by 51%. The link between eating meat and developing diabetes became undeniable. But when I went on the leading diabetes organization's website, the American Diabetes Association, not only did they not have this information front and center, they were featuring recipes for red and processed meat. And on their recipes for healthy living, they had bacon-wrapped shrimp? What the hell? When I went on the American Heart Association's Heart Healthy Recipes page, I could not believe they had an entire section on beef recipes. This was just like the American Cancer Society encouraging eating Group 1 carcinogens on their site.
It's like this menu is trying to give people heart attacks. At your website, we noticed Heart Healthy Recipes, and we were kind of bewildered by why there's a bunch of recipes on, a whole section on beef recipes, and there's also a section on egg recipes when there's such a strong link between beef, red meat, and heart disease.
I honestly don't know because I don't do that, I guess. That's not what I do.
Another organization rep that wasn't able to answer my questions, but he said that he'd have someone get in touch shortly. That dairy can increase a man's chance of getting prostate cancer by 34%. And for women who've had breast cancer, just 1 serving of whole dairy a day can increase their chance of dying from the disease 49%, and dying from anything 64%. Why weren't breast cancer sites like Susan G. Komen warning everyone about this?
For calling Susan G. Komen, this is Jocelyn. How may I help you?
Okay, so we're wondering why you don't have a huge warning about the dangers of consuming dairy on your website when there's a direct link to breast cancer. There was a study published in the Journal of the National Cancer Institute that found out women consuming dairy who has had breast cancer increases their risk of dying of breast cancer 49%. I was wondering why it's not on your website.
We cannot answer these types of questions.
Once again, another health organization rep saying someone else would have to answer my question. Rather than risk being stood up again, I went straight to the local Susan G. Komen chapter to see if they would answer my questions. They didn't want to answer my questions in person either, and told us to stop filming, but promised they would connect me to the national office directly. Susan G. Komen's Pink Ribbon campaign had done a lot to raise awareness for breast cancer, although it was confusing to see pink ribbons on dairy yogurt containers.
In the animal agriculture industry, as in the tobacco industry, these companies really have a vested interest in making sure that the public doesn't have information about their effects and what risks are really posed to consuming them.
Preparing for their American Diabetes Association interview, I took a look at their diabetes diet and meal plan recommendations, and they were loaded with foods associated with causing diabetes. How could they expect people not to get diabetes if this was the food they were recommending?
Well, the mission of the American Diabetes Association is to identify a prevention and a cure for diabetes, but in the meantime, to improve the lives of all people who are affected by diabetes.
And what's the best way to prevent this?
For type 2 diabetes, it's unclear. We can't prevent type 2 diabetes in everybody.
When we're doing the research, we came across a lot of studies that said that you actually could potentially cure or reverse diabetes with a purely plant-based diet.
I don't believe there's sufficient evidence to demonstrate that.
How does it compare to the ADA diet that you recommend?
We don't recommend a specific diet. We recommend healthy eating.
The one that's on the website.
We recommend healthy eating.
Do you have a whole list of exact day-to-day, the meal plan, the whole meal plan?
All they are selections of foods to consider. We do not have a diabetes diet.
But with that selections that you consider that plan compared to an all plant-based plan?
No one's done that study.
We found actually some studies, that a 74-week study found that low-fat vegan diet versus the ADA plan in type 2
I
diabetes.
think we're done here. I'm not gonna get into an argument about.
Oh no, I was just wondering the studies of if this is true or if it shows that or.
Any diet works. Any diet works if people follow it.
But if it's a diet that's not the proper diet, like if anyone follows a diet that they eat
I
McDonald's-
can't tell you what a proper diet is. I can tell you what an improper diet is.
So then we can talk about the good diets. I'm not sure why.
I'm not going to get into that.
Into diet?
No.
Why not?
If that's where you want to go with this, I'm sorry, I'm not the person that you should be talking to.
And why is that though?
If that's what you want to get into, I'm not the person you need to be
Into diet?
talking to.
Who do we talk to about diet?
You can talk to anybody you want
But that's interesting though. Why not recommend a diet?
because the data don't exist to support
But if
it.
we see data that we looked up that supports it with like the NIH, in Europe, the European
We're
Association
done.
of Diet.
We're done. I'm sorry, I'm not going to get
No, I'm
into
just
that
wondering-
argument with
but
you.
no, it's not an argument.
I'm not going to get
But
into
why
the
is
argument.
why is it an argument? It's just talking about in European study of diabetes and other places that have studies. Why
There are lots of
is
studies.
it even an argument? I
There are
guess?
lots of studies in the literature, many of which have never been replicated or, frankly, are wrong. That's why we do peer review, okay?
The European Association of Study of Diabetes has been peer reviewed? Or
I
study
don't
of
know what
diabetes?
study you're referring to, and in the absence of being able to see that study, I'm not going to comment.
I could show it to you.
I'm sorry, I don't have the time for that.
I just don't understand why it's an argument though. Okay. That was interesting. What he wanted to talk about was people living longer with diabetes. But once you mention eliminating diabetes or prevention, oh, whoa, now you cross the line. Prevention and cure, whoa, let's not go there.
Not only did Dr. Ratner, the chief medical officer of the American Diabetes Association, not want to talk about diet, but the fact that he had such an emotional reaction to my question made it feel I was digging into something that he didn't want uncovered. I had always thought there was no prevention for type 1 diabetes, but then I did research and came across countless studies referencing the link between exposure to dairy at a young age and type 1 diabetes. How is this possible that ADA wouldn't have this forefront on their website? Why wouldn't they be warning all parents about this even if there were only a slight chance? Why were they recommending people to actually eat these foods linked to diabetes? It seemed all of the large health organizations were encouraging people to eat the very foods linked to the diseases they're supposed to be fighting against. American Heart Association promoting beef, American Cancer Society promoting processed meat, pink ribbons on dairy products, and bacon-wrapped shrimp on American Diabetes Association. And then it all came together. What if? And there it was. The American Diabetes Association was taking money from Dannon, one of the world's largest dairy yogurt producers, Kraft Foods, makers of Velveeta processed cheese, Oscar Mayer processed meats, Lunchables processed kids meals, and Bumblebee Foods, makers of processed canned meats. American Cancer Society was taking money from Tyson, one of the world's largest meat producers, and Yum Brand, owner of Pizza Hut, KFC, and Taco Bell. Susan G. Komen was supposed to be fighting breast cancer, was corporate partnering with KFC, Dietz Watson Processed Meats, and Yoplait Yogurt. And the American Heart Association was probably the most disturbing of all, taking hundreds of thousands of dollars from the beef industry, poultry, and dairy producers, and millions from fast food and processed food manufacturers. Every single one of these organizations was taking money from meat and dairy companies that are associated with the causes of these diseases. This would be like the American Lung Association taking money from the tobacco industry. I was sick of not getting answers, so I went to the headquarters of these organizations myself.
We have to speak to someone in person. There's millions of people dying from the foods that they're recommending people to eat.
I wanted to find out why Susan G. Komen had accepted $35 million from Yoplait when their products can increase a woman's chance of dying from breast cancer 49%. And ask American Cancer Society if taking money from KFC and Tyson was the reason they promote eating meat. But every one of these organizations declined to be interviewed.
What's really sad is that we cannot trust information from these leading health organizations like the American Heart Association, the American Diabetes Association, because they are taking money from the very industries who are causing the problems that they're supposed to be helping to prevent.
So that makes the truth something that you are not going to be hearing, as far as nutrition goes, from these organizations. Well, that would be the end of their funding, that would be the end of their jobs, that would be lawsuits, they would bring the entire catastrophe down upon their heads, and they would essentially disappear as well.
The U.S. government is involved too. Every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture creates dietary guidelines for Americans. The committee who writes these guidelines has been made up of individuals who have received money from McDonald's, the National Dairy Council, the American Meat Institute, the National Dairy Board, the National Livestock and Meat Board, the American Egg Board, Dannon, candy and sugar companies, Coca-Cola, and Anheuser, just to name a few, which means we are getting our dietary recommendations from the very industries that are killing us.
And when the USDA, makes a pyramid or a power plate every 5 years for the American public, they're going to guarantee that on that plate are going to be foods which, when consumed, will result in millions of Americans perishing.
The USDA, which is supposed to be protecting us, has two missions. It's supposed to protect us, and it's supposed to protect the producer. And guess what? When those two come head to head, they usually choose the producer.
I've often typified the meat industry to people who maybe don't understand its power and reach, as it's got all the money of big tobacco and big pharma, and it has the personality of the National Rifle Association. So any little thing that comes up, man, they beat it to death.
Then there's the whole pharmaceutical aspect of it, and the fact that there's a very strong pharmaceutical industry and lobby that has a huge stake in preserving the status quo.
And these chronic diseases, these are the cash cows of the pharmaceutical industry.
You have a $5 billion stent industry. Do they ever want to see that go away? We've got a $35 billion statin drug industry. Do they ever want to see that go away?
I'm talking about the pharmaceutical industry effectively controls what doctors are told.
Most research isn't put into prevention, it's put into the medication that we might use for that particular disease.
Under conventional medical treatment, whether it be for autoimmune disease or even conditions like high blood pressure or diabetes, you're told that you have to take drugs. And not just for a week or a month or a year. You're told you have to take drugs forever. You're guaranteed that if you follow your doctor's advice, you'll be sick forever. You'll never get well. That's the guarantee. Because the strategies are all about manipulating the symptoms, not dealing with the underlying cause.
You come in with that diagnosis, you get a bunch of pills that have nothing to do with the disease causation, or you get these procedures that have nothing to do with disease causation.
It's a deception to say this pill will help you unclog your arteries, this one will save you from a stroke. No, it doesn't. The people who take the statins, etc., they still get their heart attacks, they still get their strokes. This does not reverse disease. This does not make plaques smaller. This is a fraud of massive proportions.
In the U.S., treating chronic disease such as heart disease, cancer, and diabetes is a $1.5 trillion industry. That's the GDP equivalent of the 10th richest country in the world. I went back and dug deeper into the health organization's funding, and there it was again. These organizations were accepting millions of dollars from pharmaceutical companies that are making billions of dollars from the very same diseases these health groups are supposedly trying to end. It seemed like a major conflict of interest, unless ending these diseases isn't really the goal. The pharmaceutical industry spends more money on lobbying than any other single industry. Just like animal agriculture, they are so powerful they write their own laws that have had activists in prison to silence them.
Government's in bed with anyone that gives them the most money, which is the pharmaceutical industry, which is the animal ag industries. Like, they are pumping the government full of money and resources, and in return the government's giving them what they want.